Psalm 124. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive when their anger fled against us. The flood would have engulfed us, the torrent would have swept over us, the raging waters would have swept us. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. I was driving south on Winston Churchill Road on my way to pick up Luke from school. It was about 2:30 p.m. on a sunny weekday afternoon in May. My main aim was to pick Luke up, get him to drive home. He was learning how to drive. I wanted him to practice driving home that day, and I was very careful to keep the speed on the road. I was heading south. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a car turns west into my pathway. I tried to swerve to the right to avoid it. However, that car hit the left front of my car, the left side of my car above the wheel, and the left side of my bumper were dented. As we exchanged insurance and ownership details, it became quite evident that the driver of that car was distracted and in thought when they turned into my direction. That person did not see my red car coming down from the south. We went to the police station and filed the report together. With that police report, we were instructed to approach our insurance companies and file a claim. I had the police report number and the particulars of the other insurance company. Within 2 hours, I was speaking to an insurance adjuster about my claim on the phone. I explained my situation to the adjuster. Then the insurance adjuster asked me a question that threw some perspective into the situation. When the incident occurred, were the airbags deployed? Were the airbags deployed? Then I immediately thought to myself, could have been worse. Could have been worse. Luke was not driving at that moment, and if I did not swerve to the right a little, perhaps the airbags might have been deployed. Both the driver of that car and I were emotionally shaken, but we did not suffer any major injuries. The songwriter of Psalm 124 has a similar idea about the plight of Israel. The songwriter captures the gratefulness of Israel. Things could have been worse if Yahweh, the Lord, was not with them. If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive when their anger fled against us. The flood would have engulfed us, the torrent would have swept over us, the raging waters would have swept us away. Bible scholars tell us that there are two metaphors here that are used to describe the dangers facing Israel. The first is that of a sea monster swallowing them up, and the second is that of floods and raging waters drowning them. These metaphors cannot be taken lightly. Israel is nearly swallowed up or drowned. However, Yahweh the Lord is on their side and saves them from those disasters. So think of one thing that could have happened to you if God wasn't there for you. Think of that one thing. I'll give you 10 seconds to think about it. Yes, things might have been worse if God was not around for us when that thing occurred. We must remember that Psalm 124 is part of a group of psalms called the Songs of Ascents. Israel sings this song as they go up to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. Israel is in exile and far away from Jerusalem. Pilgrims from Babylon and all over the Mediterranean travel far to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. Most of them are second or third generation Jews who did not grow up knowing Jerusalem as home. However, their parents keep their faith alive and tell them about Jerusalem and Solomon's temple in its heyday. Things could have been worse if Yahweh, that is the Lord, had not been on Israel's side. Yet, when we look at the backdrop behind this Song of Ascents, Psalm 124, we see the events of 586 BC, when King Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem and takes Daniel's generation as slaves to Babylon. If you read the book of Lamentations in the Old Testament, you will find the gruesomeness of Nebuchadnezzar's acts of conquering Jerusalem and burning the temple reacted against. Is the Lord truly on our side? Lamentations 1 verse 1. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she who once was great among the nations. She who was a queen among the provinces has now become a slave. The truth is that when Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem, it is gruesome. Men, women, and children lose their lives. Young men are displaced and brought to Babylon. And perhaps when looking back a few years from when it happened, Israel can sing, if the Lord had not been our side, things could have been worse. Yet I wonder when the things really happened, when Nebuchadnezzar was in the process of conquering Jerusalem. I wonder if Israel's prayer at the time, as we find in other parts of the Psalms, Israel's prayer at the time perhaps was, is the Lord truly on our side? This coming fall at our church, we are hoping to start a Wednesday Bible study in the afternoon. And I picked the curriculum for it. It is Nabil Qureshi's 8-session study on seeking Allah and finding Jesus. When Nabil Qureshi published his book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus in 2014, little did he know that God was calling him to be an evangelist among Muslims and equipping us to share our faith with Muslims. God was calling him to be a promoter of healthy dialogue between Muslims and Christians. Nabil was both an evangelist and a peacemaker, a rare gift for the church. And however, in December of 2016, Nabil was diagnosed to have inoperable stomach cancer. And this is a young man in his early 30s. And there were many who were praying for him at that time. And perhaps this question was also a valid question to ask as Nabil was going through treatment for stomach cancer. Is God truly on our side? And there is a video between his father, who is still a Muslim, and Nabil struggling over Nabil's cancer. And I believe that this is an issue whether we are Muslim, Christians, or members of some other faith. As we struggle through stomach cancer, perhaps the question we might want to cry and ask before the Lord, are you truly on our side? God, are you really for us when you give us these struggles of life? Whatever it is in his last video that Nabil shared this with us. This is just before Nabil passed into God's presence. He said that all he has done to share his faith should not be misused for hate against Muslims. When we talk to people about our beliefs, we should do it through a lens of love. And the whole point should be to bring people together. To bring people together to the truth. And not to hurt one another, but to help one another. My whole point in teaching is for love to reign. And it is not only the sea monster and the raging waters that plague Israel when Psalm 124 is written. Israel has been taken captive to Babylon. Then a miracle happens. It is about 40 years after Nebuchadnezzar captures Jerusalem. In 538 BC, Cyrus the Persian conquers Nebuchadnezzar at Babylon. In Ezra 1, Ezra tells us that Cyrus allows Israel to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And some of the Jews return to Jerusalem and try to build the temple, but others stay in Babylon and move all over the Mediterranean because they have found new homes for themselves through the exile. The song writer perhaps celebrate this liberation in Psalm 124. He makes references to a bird that has escaped the fowler's snare. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Psalm 124, 6-7. And in Isaiah 44, 24 and 28, we have these words. And first of all, God says these: I am the Lord, the maker of all things, who stretches out the heavens, who spreads out the earth by himself. And verse 28 of Isaiah 44, who says of Jerusalem, he is my shepherd, and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid. So God uses the same designation for Cyrus, the Persian king, as he uses for David, the most loved king in the Old Testament. He calls both Cyrus and David his shepherds. Not only is Israel saved from the sea monster and the raging waters, Israel is also saved from the terror of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. God replaces Nebuchadnezzar with the Persian king, Cyrus. And Cyrus facilitates the return of Ezra and the exiles back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city and the temple. And in Jeremiah 29, there are just famous words that God promises to Israel while they are in Babylon. After 70 years, God will bring them back to Jerusalem. And God's plans is to prosper them, not to harm them. God's plans are to give them hope and a future. Jeremiah 21:11. And so the Jews spread beyond Babylon and all over the Mediterranean. And in the New Testament, in Acts chapter 2, there is a picture of these exiled Jews returning to Jerusalem as they have always done every year. And most of them do not speak Hebrew. Yet in Acts chapter 2, on the day of Pentecost, it is a festival celebration. In Acts chapter 2, God pours out his Spirit on everyone. And everyone hears someone praising God in their language. God, the maker of heaven and earth, is looking after Israel even in exile. And there is something more profound. In the exile of Israel to Babylon, God is laying foundation for his people in the New Testament. He is laying foundation for the event of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. Pilgrims come from all over the Mediterranean to celebrate the festival of Pentecost. God pours out his Spirit, and people hear others declaring the mighty works of God in their language. So, as I think about Psalm 124, I am grateful to the Lord that Luke was not in the car when the incident happened and the airbags were not deployed. And I know that Michelle and Aya Qureshi have lost Nabil and miss him. However, Nabil is still present with us in his literature and his videos, equipping another generation of believers to share their faith. God, the maker of heaven and earth, is looking after Luke, is looking after me, is looking after the other driver, is looking after Michelle and Aya Qureshi. Psalm 124 ends with this, verse 8. Our help is in the name of the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. When I suggested to Pastor Ian that we study Psalms 120 to 134 in the summer, I had in mind this book by Eugene Peterson, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, Discipleship in an Instant Society. And it is a book about Psalms 120 to 134. Eugene Peterson taught me how to pray by reading the Psalms. The Psalms tell us that life is tough. And in Psalm 124, perhaps we have memories of Israel losing Jerusalem and the temple, men, women, and children being killed, Daniel's generation taken to Babylon as slaves. Yet in this psalm, the songwriter says, things could have been worse if the Lord had not been on their side. 4 times Yahweh, the Lord, is mentioned. God saves them from the sea monster, the raging waters, and the fowler's snare. Just want to end by reading page 79 of A Long Obedience in the same direction. A look to the heavens can bring a breathtaking sense of wonder and majesty, and if a person is a believer, a feeling of praise to the Lord who made heaven and earth. This psalm looks the other direction. It looks into the troubles of history, the anxiety of personal conflict and emotional trauma, and it sees there the God who is on our side, God our help. The close look, the microscopic insight into the dragon's terrors, the flood waters, and the imprisoning trap sees the action of God in deliverance. We speak our words of praise in a world that is hellish. We sing our songs of victory in a world where things get messy. We leave our joy among people who neither understand nor encourage us. But the content of our lives is God, not humanity. We are not scavenging in the dark alleys of the world, poking in its garbage cans for a bare subsistence. We are traveling in the light toward God, who is rich in mercy and strong to save. It is Christ, not culture, that defines our lives. It is the help we experience, not the hazards we risk, that shapes our days. Amen.